The last transmission from Weather Station Theta came through at 11:47 p.m. on December 9, 1948. It consisted of 7 words, recorded by a receiving operator in Anchorage who had been monitoring routine atmospheric data for the previous 6 hours. They're not supposed to move like that. Then silence. The station sat on a rocky outcrop in the Aleutian Islands, 43 miles from the nearest inhabited settlement. It had been operational for 11 months. 3 men lived there in rotating shifts, recording wind patterns, temperature fluctuations, and barometric pressure for the newly established civilian weather network. Their reports fed into aviation routes and fishing forecasts. The work was monotonous but necessary. The 3 men assigned to the December rotation were experienced. David Carver, the lead meteorologist, had worked at 2 previous stations without incident. He was 34 and methodical and kept detailed logs beyond what the job required. James Holbrook, the radio operator, was 26 and had served in the Navy during the war. He knew Morse code and voice transmission protocols better than most men twice his age. The 3rd man, Peter Wyatt, handled maintenance and supplies. He was 41, a former fisherman who preferred isolation to crowds. They arrived at the station on November 28th via supply boat. The previous crew reported nothing unusual during the handoff. Equipment functioned properly. Food stores were adequate. The diesel generator ran smoothly. Weather patterns had been stable for 3 weeks. The station itself was a reinforced concrete structure built into the hillside, designed to withstand winds exceeding 100 miles per hour. It contained a main observation room, a radio chamber, sleeping quarters, and a storage area. 2 auxiliary buildings stood nearby, a generator shed and an emergency shelter stocked with additional fuel and rations. A steel observation tower rose 30 feet above the main building, equipped with anemometers and barometric sensors. For the first 9 days, transmissions followed the standard schedule, twice daily reports at 0, 600, and 1800 hours. Brief, technical, unremarkable. Wind northwest at 15 knots. Pressure 29.92 inches. Temperature 31 degrees Fahrenheit. Visibility 8 miles. The men's voices came through clearly. No equipment malfunctions. No request for additional supplies. On December 7th, the morning transmission was delayed by 40 minutes. When Holbrook finally made contact, he apologized for the disruption. He said Wyatt had reported seeing something unusual near the generator shed around dawn, and they'd gone to investigate. The Anchorage operator asked what they'd found. Holbrook paused for 3 seconds before responding. Probably just seals. Wyatt gets jumpy sometimes. The evening transmission that day came through on schedule. Carver delivered the weather data himself, which was uncommon. His voice sounded strained but professional. He made no mention of the morning incident. The operator in Anchorage noted the change in routine, but didn't consider it significant enough to report. December 8th brought deteriorating weather. Wind speeds increased to 32 knots. Cloud cover thickened. The morning transmission was brief. Holbrook confirmed they were securing loose equipment and checking the generator fuel levels. He estimated the storm would peak within 18 hours. Standard procedure. Nothing in his tone suggested distress. But the evening transmission never came. At 18:15 hours, Anchorage attempted to raise the station. No response. They tried again at 18:30, 1900, and 1930. Silence. At 2000 hours, the supervising officer initiated emergency contact protocols. He ordered continuous attempts every 15 minutes. Weather stations occasionally lost power during storms, but they had backup systems, battery-powered radios, flares. Protocols existed for precisely this situation. At 2,247 hours, the radio suddenly crackled to life. The operator in Anchorage immediately began recording. He could hear breathing on the other end, heavy, uneven. Then Holbrook's voice came through, barely above a whisper. "Anchorage, this is Theta. Do you copy?" The operator responded immediately, asking for status and confirmation of personnel safety. There was a 6-second gap before Holbrook spoke again. "We need to know if you have any records of previous activity at this location. Before the station was built. Anything. Check the archives." The operator asked what kind of activity. Holbrook didn't answer directly. Carver found something in the storage room, behind the shelving unit. It wasn't there during inventory. "We've checked the logs. Nothing was left by the previous crew." The operator asked what they'd found. Another pause. 7 seconds this time. Background noise suggested movement. Possibly someone else in the room with Holbrook. "I can't describe it over the radio, but we think it was placed there deliberately. Hidden. Recently." The operator asked if they were in immediate danger. Holbrook's breathing became more audible. "We don't know, but something's been coming to the observation tower after dark. We can hear it on the metal stairs. Always the same pattern. 11 steps. Then it stops. Then 11 more. It never reaches the top." The operator asked if they could see what was climbing. Holbrook's response came quickly this time. "The spotlight doesn't reach that angle, and we're not opening the door to look." He requested immediate evacuation. The operator explained that no boats could reach them until the storm passed, likely another 36 to 48 hours. He asked if they had enough supplies to secure themselves inside until extraction. Holbrook confirmed they did. Then Wyatt's voice came through in the background, sharp and urgent. The words weren't clear on the recording, but Holbrook responded to him directly. "I don't care what you think you saw. We're staying inside until..." The transmission cut out. Anchorage tried to reestablish contact for the next 3 hours. At 0147 hours, they received a brief transmission. Not voices this time, just sound. A rhythmic scraping, like metal dragging across concrete. It lasted 18 seconds before cutting to static. At 0600 hours, the storm began to ease. Wind speeds dropped to 23 knots. Visibility improved to 4 miles. Anchorage attempted contact again. This time, Carver answered. His voice was calm, almost unnaturally so. He delivered the standard weather report as if nothing had happened. Temperature, pressure, wind direction. All accurate according to the instruments they could verify remotely. The operator asked about the previous night's transmissions. Carver claimed ignorance. He said the radio had experienced interference during the peak of the storm. He made no mention of Holbrook's requests or the sounds on the recording. When pressed, he simply repeated that conditions had stabilized and they were resuming normal operations. The operator asked to speak with Holbrook or Wyatt. Carver said both men were conducting exterior checks of the equipment and would be unavailable for approximately 2 hours. He ended the transmission before any follow-up questions could be asked. At 1,200 hours, Holbrook made contact. He sounded exhausted. He reported that Carver had not slept since the previous evening and was becoming erratic. He said Wyatt had locked himself in the emergency shelter and refused to return to the main building. When asked why, Holbrook hesitated. He says something came inside last night while we were on the radio. He was in the storage room, and he heard it in the corridor. He didn't see it, but he heard it moving. He described it as wet. That's the word he used. Wet. The operator asked where Carver was at that moment. Holbrook's voice dropped. He's at the observation tower. He's been staring at the stairs for the last hour. He won't tell me what he's looking for. The operator instructed Holbrook to retrieve Wyatt from the shelter and maintain visual contact with Carver until evacuation. Holbrook acknowledged the instructions, but didn't sound confident he could follow them. At 1,430 hours, Wyatt made an unscheduled transmission. He was still in the emergency shelter. He said he'd found something scratched into the interior wall, hidden behind the supply crates. Words, not English. He described the letters as angular, carved deep into the concrete. He estimated it would have taken hours to create. The operator asked if the words had been there before. Wyatt was certain they hadn't been. He'd personally stocked that shelter in early December. The wall had been blank. At 1800 hours, Carver delivered the evening report. His tone was measured, professional. He made no reference to the tower or to Wyatt's location. The data he provided was accurate. He signed off without incident. But at 20:31 hours, the radio activated again. No voice, just breathing. Slow, deliberate. It continued for 2 minutes and 14 seconds. The operator in Anchorage recorded the entire sequence. Near the end, there was a faint sound in the background, a door closing. Then the transmission ended. At 2,320 hours, Holbrook came through. He was whispering. He said Carver had gone outside 20 minutes earlier and hadn't returned. He said the exterior lights were still on, but he couldn't see anyone from the window. He was alone in the main building. The operator asked if Wyatt was still in the shelter. Holbrook said he didn't know. He said the radio in the shelter wasn't responding. At 2,347 hours, Holbrook transmitted again. His voice was shaking. There's someone on the tower. I can see them through the window. But it's not Carver. The proportions are wrong. The way it's standing, it's wrong. The operator asked him to describe what he was seeing. Holbrook didn't respond immediately. When he did, his words came out in fragments. It's not moving, just standing at the top, facing the building. I think it knows I'm watching. The operator told him to lock the interior doors and remain in the radio room. Holbrook acknowledged. Then he said something that wasn't in response to any question. Carver was right. They do move, but not like anything I've ever seen. At 2,359 hours, the transmission cut out. At 0002 hours, it resumed. Holbrook's voice barely audible. It's inside. The operator asked for his location. No response. Just breathing. Not Holbrook's. Deeper, slower. At 0004 hours, silence. At 0600 hours, no morning transmission came. At 1800 hours, no evening transmission came. At 2100 hours, a boat was dispatched from the nearest settlement. The weather had cleared enough for safe passage. Estimated arrival time was 1,400 hours the following day. At 1,147 hours on December 9th, the radio activated one final time. The operator in Anchorage immediately began recording. The voice was faint, distorted. It could have been Holbrook. It could have been Carver. The audio quality made identification impossible. They're not supposed to move like that. 7 words. Then nothing. The operator tried to respond. No acknowledgement. He tried again. Silence. At 1,150 hours, the decision was made to continue with the extraction boat and investigate the station directly. The boat reached Weather Station Theta at 1,420 hours on December 10th. 4 men disembarked. 2 civilian technicians, 1 supervising officer, and a medical assistant. The sea was calm. Visibility was clear. The station looked intact from the exterior. The generator was still running. The lights were still on. The observation tower stood empty. The main door was unlocked. They entered the building and immediately noticed the silence, not just the absence of voices, but the absence of sound entirely. No wind through the vents. No hum from the equipment. Just stillness. The radio room was empty. The equipment was still active, tuned to the correct frequency. A notepad sat on the desk with the last recorded weather data dated December 9th, 0600 hours. The handwriting was neat, controlled. Carver's. The sleeping quarters showed signs of recent use. 2 bunks had unmade sheets. 1 was perfectly made, military-style corners. The lockers were closed but not locked. Personal items remained inside. Photographs, letters, a wristwatch. The storage room appeared organized. Shelving units lined the walls. Canned food, tools, spare parts. everything inventoried and labeled, but the shelving unit against the far wall had been moved. Drag marks on the concrete floor showed it had been pulled forward approximately 18 inches. Behind it, the wall was exposed. Scratched into the concrete were symbols, not letters, not any recognizable language. They were deep, deliberate, arranged in 3 horizontal rows, 11 symbols per row. The technicians photographed them. Later analysis by linguists at 3 separate universities would fail to identify the origin or meaning. But beneath the symbols, something else had been carved. A date, October 1946, 2 years before the station was built. The emergency shelter was locked from the inside. They had to force the door. Wyatt was there. He was sitting against the far wall, knees drawn up, facing the entrance. His eyes were open. He had been dead for approximately 36 hours. No visible injuries. No signs of struggle. The medical assistant would later describe his expression as one of complete resignation. On the wall behind him, more symbols, identical to the ones in the storage room. Same depth, same spacing. But these were fresh. The concrete dust was still visible on the floor, beneath them. Wyatt's hands were covered in blood and fragments of concrete. In the main building, they found Holbrook in the corridor between the radio room and the sleeping quarters. He was lying face down. No injuries. No blood. Dead for approximately 24 hours. His hands were clenched. When they opened his right hand, they found a small piece of paper, folded multiple times. On it was written a single sentence in Holbrook's handwriting. It was here before we were. Carver was never found. They searched the entire facility, the generator shed, the observation tower, the perimeter out to 500 feet. No body, no tracks, no blood. His coat was still hanging in the sleeping quarters. His boots were by his bunk. But on the observation tower, at the top platform, they found something. The metal railing was bent, not outward, as if something had fallen, inward, as if something had gripped it with enough force to deform the steel. The technicians measured the spacing between the deformation points, approximately 9 inches, too wide for human hands. On the stairs, they found wetness, not water, not oil, something else. It had a consistency like glycerin, but no identifiable smell. Lab analysis would later determine it was organic, but from no known animal or plant. It had been there for less than 48 hours. They collected samples. They photographed everything. They sealed the station. At 1,640 hours, they departed. Weather Station Theta was officially decommissioned on December 15, 1948. The report cited structural concerns and equipment failure. No mention of the deaths. No mention of the symbols. No mention of the final transmission. Carver's body was never recovered. He was declared missing, presumed dead, on January 3, 1949. Holbrook and Wyatt were buried in their hometowns. The autopsies were sealed. Cause of death for both was listed as cardiac arrest. The investigation was handled by a joint team from the Weather Bureau and the Department of the Interior. 6 men spent 4 days reviewing the physical evidence and interviewing personnel who had been in contact with the station during its final days. Their findings were compiled into a 43-page report submitted on January 12, 1949. The report was classified. Publicly, the incident was explained as a combination of equipment failure, adverse weather, and psychological strain. Isolation-induced paranoia was cited as a contributing factor to the deaths. The unusual circumstances were attributed to the men's deteriorating mental states during the storm. The case was closed. But 3 details were never adequately explained. First, the symbols. The investigation team brought in a specialist from the Smithsonian Institution, a linguist who had worked with pre-Columbian scripts and undeciphered writing systems. He examined the photographs and the concrete samples taken from the walls. His conclusion was unambiguous. The symbols were not decorative. They were not random. They followed a clear grammatical structure, with repeated patterns suggesting syntax and meaning. But they matched nothing in the known record. No indigenous Aleutian script, no Russian or early American markings, no naval codes or surveyor shorthand. He estimated the symbols required at least 20 to 30 hours to carve at that depth. Wyatt had been locked in the shelter for less than 12 hours before his death. Second, the wetness on the tower stairs. The sample was sent to a lab in Washington, D.C. 3 separate tests confirmed it was organic material, but the cellular structure was unlike anything in existing biological databases. It contained proteins, but arranged in chains that didn't correspond to any known animal phylum. One technician noted in his report that the sample seemed to resist breakdown. Even when exposed to extreme heat, it retained its consistency. A follow-up sample was requested. By the time the request reached the Aleutians, the substance had disappeared. The stairs were dry. The team that returned to the station in late January found no trace of it. Third, the recordings. The Anchorage operator had recorded 7 separate transmissions from December 7th to December 9th. The audio was analyzed by signal experts at 3 military installations. They confirmed the voices belonged to Holbrook, Carver, and Wyatt. But in the final transmission, the one at 1,147 hours on December 9th, something else was present. In the background, beneath the distorted voice saying, "They're not supposed to move like that," there was another sound, faint, almost imperceptible. It lasted 3 seconds. It was described in a report as rhythmic, organic, and inconsistent with any known equipment or environmental noise. One analyst compared it to breathing. Another said it sounded like wet fabric being dragged across stone. A third refused to characterize it at all, noting only that it should not have been possible to record given the equipment limitations. The recording was played once for the lead investigator. He ordered it sealed immediately afterward. No copies were made. The original tape was placed in a storage facility in Maryland, cataloged under an unrelated filing code. In 1952, a researcher requesting access to Aleutian weather data from the 1940s discovered a reference to station data in a logbook. He submitted a formal request to review the decommissioning records. His request was denied. He was told the station had been destroyed by a storm in 1950 and all records had been lost. This was a lie. In 1961, a civilian contractor working on a new weather installation in the Aleutians was given a map showing previous station locations. Station Theta was not marked. When he asked about it, the supervising officer said there had never been a station at that location. The contractor had seen the old concrete foundation himself 2 days earlier. In 1978, a Freedom of Information Act request filed by a journalist seeking information on isolated weather stations was partially fulfilled. 53 pages of documents were released, heavily redacted. Station Theta was mentioned twice. Both mentions were blacked out. In 1989, the storage facility in Maryland was decommissioned. Thousands of archive materials were transferred to the National Archives. The tape from Station Theta was not among them. No record of its disposal exists. In 2003, a historian researching Cold War-era atmospheric monitoring found a single-page memo in a misfiled folder. It was dated January 1949 and addressed to the Secretary of the Interior. The memo recommended that no further weather stations be constructed within a 50-mile radius of the previous Station Theta location. No explanation was provided. The recommendation was implemented without comment. The site has never been reoccupied. In 2011, a documentary crew filming a series on abandoned Arctic installations obtained permission to visit the location. They brought cameras, drones, and a geological surveyor. The foundation station Theta was still visible, though overgrown and partially collapsed. The observation tower had fallen years earlier. The generator shed was gone entirely. They spent 6 hours at the site. The footage shows the ruins in detail. Concrete slabs, rusted metal beams, broken glass, One of the crew members found a piece of equipment, a barometric sensor, corroded but still identifiable. They documented it, then left it where they found it. Later, during editing, the producer noticed something in the drone footage. At 17 minutes and 42 seconds, the camera passes over the collapsed interior of the main building. In the corner of the frame, partially obscured by debris, something is visible on one of the remaining walls. Symbols. They matched the ones photographed in 1948. The producer contacted the historian who had found the 1949 memo. He reviewed the footage and confirmed the similarity. He requested the raw files. The production company complied. 3 weeks later, he returned the files with a brief note. Do not return to that location. No further explanation. The documentary aired in 2012 with the footage included. The symbols were visible for less than 4 seconds. No commentary was provided. The episode received moderate viewership and no significant attention. But 2 months after it aired, the production company received a letter from a woman in Oregon. She was 89 years old. Her brother had been James Holbrook. She said she'd seen the episode by chance and recognized the location from a photograph her brother had sent her in November 1948. The photograph showed him standing in front of the station, smiling. She said that after his death, their mother had received his personal effects. Among them was a small notebook, not mentioned in any official report. It contained his daily observations from the station. The entries were mundane until December 6th. That day, he wrote a single line. Wyatt heard something under the building last night. He won't talk about it. December 7th. Carver says the instruments are recording movement at night, but nothing's there. December 8th. We found the symbols. I don't know what they mean, but I know they weren't there yesterday. The final entry was December 9th, early morning. Just one sentence. If something was here before we built this place, what did we trap inside? The woman said she had kept the notebook for 63 years. She offered to send it to the producer. He agreed. The notebook arrived 3 weeks later. It matched her description. The handwriting was confirmed as Holbrook's by comparing it to his personnel file. The production company scanned every page and forwarded copies to the historian. He examined the notebook for 2 weeks. Then he requested a meeting with the producer. They met in a public library. The historian brought a single photograph with him. It was one of the images taken by the investigation team in 1948. It showed the wall in the storage room, the symbols clearly visible. Beside it, he placed a printout of Holbrook's notebook entry from December 8th. At the bottom of the page, barely visible, Holbrook had sketched something. Small, rough, but unmistakable. The same symbols. But they weren't identical. They were inverted. The historian pointed to the discrepancy. He said that in every known writing system, inversion changes meaning entirely. If the symbols were a language, and if Holbrook had drawn them backward, it suggested one of two possibilities. Either he was documenting what he saw incorrectly, or what he saw on December 8th was different from what the investigation team photographed on December 10th. Someone or something had changed them. The producer asked what that meant. The historian folded the photograph and put it back in his briefcase. It means they were still there when the investigation team arrived, and they were still capable of altering the evidence. The notebook was placed in a private collection. The producer chose not to include the information in any follow-up material. The site remains abandoned. No expedition has returned since 2011. The coordinates are publicly available, but no commercial or research activity has been permitted within 10 miles of the location since 2014. The exclusion zone was implemented quietly, attributed to environmental protection regulations. The recordings from 1948 have never been located. The symbols have never been deciphered. David Carver has never been found. And on December 9th every year, at exactly 11:47 p.m., the Anchorage monitoring station, now automated, unmanned, registers a brief signal on the frequency once assigned to Weather Station Theta. It lasts 7 seconds. It contains no voice. No data, just static. And beneath it, if the volume is raised high enough, something rhythmic. 11 beats. A pause. 11 more. If this story left you with questions you can't shake, you're not alone. Hit that like button if you want more forgotten cases like this one. Subscribe because next week's story is even darker. It was buried for a reason. And drop a comment telling me, what do you think those symbols meant? I read every single one. Until next time, some things stay hidden for a reason.